What's going on, everybody? Mortem here, this time bringing you my first impressions of Mass Effect 2. So I've never actually played the entire Mass Effect series before, but I've been recently going through it for the first time with the Legendary Edition, reviewing each title individually, and then I'll probably do like a series wrap-up at the end. But basically, I review games after 100%, which is my goal for Mass Effect 2, which I imagine is going to take a little bit of work, as my first impressions tell me that there's quite a bit of variation in outcomes with companions, things like that. But while I have never played before, there are a few things that I'm aware of just because this is a gigantic series and it's frankly hard to avoid information on it for as long as it has been out, which has been quite some time. Now, the game kicks off, of course, with the Normandy's destruction in a bit of a scripted encounter. Your ship gets blown apart by another ship and you get picked up by Cerberus and brought back to life via the Lazarus Project. I do actually kind of like this opening, to be honest, because due to the events of Mass Effect 1, I think Shepard had kind of painted a target on his back for people who are working on behalf of the Reapers, so I think it makes sense someone would come out of the blue and attack him in this manner. But moreover, it's a very convenient narrative excuse to give you an opportunity to change your character even if you imported your save, like I did. So I will have a few different playthroughs of this game more than likely, but my first playthrough will of course be the most thorough in terms of all the side content, etc. So naturally, I'm importing like my main guy. So on that note, you wake up 2 years later, but I will say that my character from Mass Effect 1, I wasn't using the default Shepard look, and I liked the way that the character looked in Mass Effect 1, but just the straight swap to Mass Effect 2 with that particular look was horrendous, and was frankly some nightmare fuel, so it was nice to be able to still be able to customize the appearance of my Shepard, even though I had imported a character. They still let you change the appearance, which was nice because he needed some touching up, frankly. Also, I think the stuff with Cerberus right at the beginning here is pretty interesting. I know Cerberus was part of the side missions in the first game, but they weren't really like a big presence, if you will, but they were involved in some of the side missions. And it's my understanding that they're sort of a group that puts humans above other alien species. Not to the point that they hate other species or anything, simply that they look out for humanity first, frankly. But probably more importantly, they're largely considered like a terrorist organization in terms of the galactic community. However, they have leads about what the Reapers might be trying to do next, and they want you, Shepard, to get involved, which in and of itself, I was curious how they were going to reconcile that with the fact that Shepard used to be a Spectre, etc. So you do get to go to the Citadel and kind of talk to the Council if you saved them, or the newer Council if you didn't, was my understanding. And due to the tenuous political landscape of the Council not wanting to recognize that the Reapers are a real threat still, while also not trying to deal with making Shepard, a man who came back from the dead, basically, who is also a human icon to the galaxy at this point, look bad, they decide to basically give you a pass to work with Cerberus as long as you keep it to the Terminus systems, which are outside of Alliance control. So kind of a cool way to work the story in there for the most part, if maybe a little convenient. But I will say, people did warn me that this particular title is where the series starts to tone down the RPG mechanics, and I would have to agree. They very clearly took a lot of the RPG elements out of the game. They simplified the skill progression, characters that could once spec into things like hacking or decryption, that type of stuff. Everyone can do that now, basically. They also toned down a lot of the gear, so rather than like equipping your gear in an inventory screen, it's largely done before missions. The missions themselves are structured as missions a lot of the time. However, I will say, despite the toning down of the RPG mechanics, overall I think the feel of the game is really solid. I would say the combat is vastly improved from the first game. I would say the only thing about the combat that I'm liking less in this instance is the thermal clips. So rather than just having your guns overheat and then cool down, you now have to pick up what is essentially ammo, but they call it thermal clips now. And while even on Insanity, which is what I'm starting the game on, there's ammo everywhere, so it's not like this is a big concern, so it's just a curious change in my opinion. But overall, I would say the combat's better. There's new abilities for all of the classes. The classes themselves seem a slight bit more distinct from the first game, but it's my understanding that the Legendary Edition in particular altered a lot of the first game's classes anyways. But I would say coming into 2 from the first game in Legendary Edition, the classes in 2 seem to be much more distinct from each other, which again is probably just a product of the Legendary Edition's changes to the first game on my end. And then the other thing I wanted to mention mention is that the exploration actually does seem a lot better. So I've been messing around with a bit of the side content before I hit too much of the main story type stuff. And the side content seems to be, so far, structured in a much more interesting way. Now, as you explore the systems and galaxies in this game, rather than just hit a survey button, you have to launch probes in a sort of mini game to check out planets, to then get materials, to then perform research on the new and improved Normandy that you get, which is how a lot of your power upgrades come from. So rather than just equipping better gear or learning better skills like the first game, now you perform all this research, which just gives you base increases to things like damage, etc., in addition to your skills, but the skills themselves are much reduced. And while it's definitely a simpler system, I don't think it's bad by any means, but I would tell you, when I actually get side missions now, they kind of drop you directly into the area that the side mission is taking place, as opposed to being dropped into this wide open empty space on the Mako like they did in the previous title. So I'm enjoying that part of it. And then the last thing I want to leave you guys is companions seem to be a really big deal for Mass Effect 2. Like, most of the content seems to focus around the companions and loyalty missions. It is rather unavoidable to learn, of course, that there is a suicide mission in Mass Effect 2, so despite having not played it before, I'm well aware that that is a thing, and I know that your companion loyalty plays a factor in that. Please don't spoil all of it down for me down below, I'll get there in my own time. But while they did tone down the RPG mechanics elsewhere, so far with these companion quests, there do seem to be some branching paths where you can either earn their loyalty or not, and then that will affect things later. So while the RPG mechanics have been toned down, they seem to have put a huge emphasis on the relationship you have with all of the characters that are around you. And it is nice to finally see some choices actually reflected in game. So a lot of the even smaller choices that I saw in Mass Effect 1 have now been brought up in the next game here. So it's nice to finally see some payoff to some of those decisions, as well as catch up with some of the Normandy's crew 2 years after the destruction of the initial version of Shepard, shall we say. But that's pretty much all I've got for you guys right now. I would say broad first impressions. I can definitely tell they toned some of the RPG mechanics down for sure in favor of streamlining things. There seems to be a much bigger emphasis on combat. There are these huge combat arenas where you just deal with wave after wave of enemies as opposed to the first game. So if I could sum up my impressions succinctly here, I would say it largely seems to boil down to combat and companions in this title so far. Overall, having fun. I'm kind of enjoying the gameplay improvements from the first title, even if the story seems to have shifted from building my Shepard into just playing as Shepard, if that makes sense. But that's what I've got for you guys right now. Hope you enjoyed the video. If you're looking forward to the review, by all means, hit like, comment, subscribe, all that YouTube jazz. But regardless of any of that, truly, just thank you so much for watching. I really do appreciate it. May you wander in wisdom and have an amazing day.